I want to meet you in the book of Deuteronomy, and you're thinking, how are we getting to Jesus if we're opening in the book of Deuteronomy? Good question. I am intrigued by the questions of the Bible. I love to watch, and what I mean by that is the questions that God asks in the Bible, either the questions that God asks of men or that God demands us to ask of ourselves. I find those intriguing. I feel like if God's asking a question, it can't be because God doesn't know the answer. It must be because God perceives that I don't know the answer, or that I won't ask that question without his help. And that's the question that would unlock something in me if I would pay attention and ask that question. So when I watch God asking questions or Jesus asking questions, I don't assume he doesn't know. I assume that the people he's asking do not know, and that he thought, because he deemed it necessary to put it in the Bible, that maybe I wouldn't know. And that if I would ask that question, I could unlock something that would be beneficial to my life. And so I want to take you today to a Jesus question. But to do that, we're going to start in Deuteronomy for this reason. I think sometimes we hear the questions of Jesus or the questions of God, and we're making an assumption about the question without having sat through the course. If you walked in on finals week in a classroom and you heard the final exam theme, and you hadn't come to class one time, for anyone that ever went to college or seminary, that's a bad way to try to pass that class. And you think, oh, I can just nail this final. And you didn't sit through one lecture, you didn't read one book, you didn't look up one item, you didn't write anything down. Good luck, because you have no context. You might think you're smart enough to make that work by reading that question, but probably not. And what happens a lot of times is we're reading the questions of Jesus, but we didn't sit through the course. And without sitting through the course, we don't really understand what the classroom is working with. Like, what does Peter, James, and John know about that statement that I don't know? Well, probably a lot. Peter, James, and John are first century Jewish men who were raised on Torah. I'm a 21st century man who is lucky I can pronounce it, and certainly can't understand it in the Hebrew. And so what might they have brought to the table that I can't possibly bring to the table? But because I get to go back and at least look at their source text, I might be able to get an understanding of it. So we're going to try to condense their course, their semester, down into one little slice of Torah today as we head to the backside of the Torah in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 1. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release of debts. And this is the form of the release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not require it of his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. This is like the biblical version of student loan forgiveness. Amen. I'm paying mine back too. I woo along with you. Forgive them. And I think I'm going to leave that alone. I was going to say, if you have a problem with that, read that verse again. Of a foreigner, you may require it, but you shall give up your claim to what is owed by your brother. Check that out. Of a foreigner, you may actually require that debt, but if it's not a foreigner, then you got to give up the claim to that. So we've parsed a difference between the debt owed to us by people in our family, in our bloodline, in our tribe, versus the debt owed to us by people that are the outsiders. Let's call them the others. The others are not to be looked at the same as the us. At least that's what it looks like is happening in this text. So you don't have to claim that which is owed by your brother, except when there may be no poor among you, for the Lord will greatly bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance. So no foreigner counts, and don't bother if there are no poor. All right, I'm just setting us up. This is early in the course, all right? Just a couple of ground rules as we get started in the text. So if there's no poor among you, then in verse 5, only if you carefully obey the voice of the Lord your God to observe with care all these commandments which I command you today, for the Lord your God will bless you, just as he promised you. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. You shall reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over you. We love to quote stuff like Deuteronomy 15:6, that we will lend, but not borrow, but we don't like to quote that we're supposed to be forgiving debts of people that owe us money. Okay, so this is one of those moments where we like to pick the part of the chapter that feels good and sort of just slide past the part of the chapter that doesn't feel good. And so we're not gonna get to do that. You're gonna find that that doesn't work because you're gonna need that info on the final. You don't just get to go, I'm gonna skip Thursday's class, I'll still be cool. There's gonna be some stuff in there you need, and so we gotta pay attention, we gotta watch. Watch verse 7. If there is among you a poor man of your brethren within any of the gates in your land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he needs. Now beware, lest there be a wicked thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release is at hand, and your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to the Lord against you, and it become a sin among you. Let me pause there for just a moment. God gives a big beware, because remember how this chapter opened. It was this: in the 7th year you forgive debts. And so as he gets deeper into the chapter, God goes, I know what you're thinking. Whenever somebody borrows from you, you're thinking about how close are we to the 7th year? Am I gonna be able to get this back? And if we're too close to the 7th year, then I will conveniently turn my cell phone off until we restart the debt calendar so that I don't hear from anybody in need, because I don't want to forgive in the 7th year. It's already year 6. I'd rather wait until it's, say, year 1 or 2 to get started, and then I get a bunch of, then they got to pay me back over the course of time. And so the beware is, don't watch to see how much you're going to be able to get back if you're bumped up against the year of release. He said, because that would be, and look at that interesting statement in the middle of verse 9, that would be your eye being evil against your poor brother. And that's where I want to land for just a second this morning, is the idea of the evil eye. Now, I'm not talking about what is common amongst a lot of, say, Zoroastrianism and other thought processes, New Age processes of the world, even reaching back into some Jewish rabbinical tradition, is the idea that if you gave the evil eye harshly enough to someone, you could place a curse upon them. That's not Torah. That's the traditions of men. The Torah tradition of the evil eye is whenever you look at someone and resent the necessity to help them, or resent that they are able to receive what you are able to receive, knowing that they belong to the other, knowing that they are outside of your group, knowing that they are not part of that circle. And so this is the evil eye that the Hebrews would talk about. Let's close this passage here, 10 and 11. You shall surely give to him, your heart shall not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your works and all which you put in your hand. Here's the great irony of the chapter. Remember this from earlier in the chapter. I'll read it for you. In verse 4, God said you can ignore the whole debt release if there be no poor among you. That was verse 4. Look at verse 11. For the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor, to your needy in your land. In other words, I told you earlier to ignore all of the debt release if you ever get to the place where there are no poor. Here comes the irony. There'll never be a moment where there are no poor, he says. So by the way, if you got excited earlier in the course when you found out that there are caveats to your forgiveness and there are caveats to your debt release, he goes, I'm here to bust your bubble. The caveat you thought you had will never exist. There'll always be somebody in need.